just remind everybody that my name is Adam Blackwell, the Vice President, International Development Services Group. And on behalf of the team at the Global Terrorism Trends and Analysis Center, a mouthful, better known as GTTAC, I'll be moderating this session. For those of you that don't know us, GTTAC was created by Development Services Group and our partners at GMU's Terrorism, Transnational Crime and Corruption Center, led by Dr. Louise Shelley, to support DSG's contract that we have with the Department of State to develop a database of global terrorism incidents, to prepare the annual annex of statistical information on terrorism, and to help prepare and edit the congressionally mandated country reports on terrorism. We do this with a combination of technology, data collection, and a team of very well-trained, multilingual and multicultural data analysts, many of whom will be listening in today. I should also say that we have an international eminent group on our advisory board. Many of them have spoke to the group, and many of whom we hope are listening in today. And if anybody is listening and would like to participate or be a panelist in one of these future sessions, please let me know. We are delighted to kick off what is essentially our third session with our panelist, Dr. Speckhard, who is the Director of International Center for the Study of Violent Extremism and serves as the Adjunct Associate Professor of Psychiatry at Georgetown's University School of Medicine. She has interviewed more than 700 terrorists, their family members, and supporters in various parts of the world, including Western Europe, the Balkans, Central Asia, and the former Soviet Union, and of course the Middle East. In the past 5 years, she has conducted in-depth psychological interviews of more than 250 ISIS defectors, returnees, and prisoners, as well as 16 al-Shabaab cadre. She has also interviewed their family members as well as other ideologues. In this time, she has studied their trajectories into and out of terrorism and their experience inside ISIS and al-Shabaab. From these interviews, she has developed the Breaking the ISIS Brand Counter-Narrative Project materials, which include more than 200 brief counter-narrative videos of terrorism denouncing their groups as un-Islamic, corrupt, and brutal. So I am going to turn it over to Anne shortly. I just want to remind everybody that you are muted. I will mute myself in a moment. If you would like to ask questions, you do have the Q&A feature here at the bottom of your screen. Please ask your questions using that. Anne will speak for roughly 20 minutes. We'll see a short video, and then we'll get into the Q&A, and we hope to wrap up by 11:45. So Anne, we're delighted you're with us, and thanks for agreeing to do this, and over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me. And it's the first time I heard of DSG. I haven't heard of GTAC before, but very nice to meet all of you. And I hear there's some State Department folks on. As was said, I've been interviewing terrorists. I'm a psychologist. I've been interviewing terrorists for about 20 years and talked to over 700 of them, basically in an in-depth psychological interview. And I've always been interested in what puts a terrorist on the terrorist trajectory, and since I'm a psychologist, what also could bring him back off. Oh, I should say quickly, I just sent the YouTube address to our webinar controller because I still can't share the screen. So when I'm done speaking, if you could play the video for me, that would be good. But you've got that, it's been sent to the webinar controller.
And Anne, if I could, I don't want to interrupt you, but I did forget to read our disclaimer that the views expressed here are of the authors, not necessarily DSG, GMU, or State Department.
Okay,
Sorry.
Great. And that's true. They're just mine and of our center. So anyway, I was always looking at what puts a terrorist on the trajectory, and since I'm a psychologist, what could take them back off of it, or what could have prevented that altogether. And I would say after talking to 700 terrorists from Palestinian jihadists to Palestinian Marxists to abortion clinic terrorists to now we've started talking to far right and talking to ISIS and Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, I can say that there are 4 variables that I would say are necessary and sufficient to make a terrorist. And those are first and foremost a group. Very few people will become a terrorist without a group somehow being behind them. You hear of all these lone wolf attacks, but if you look into it, you will see that they are on the internet. They're studying the ideology of a terrorist group, and they're thinking through how they can take part. And so they're not acting independently. And what people need when they are thinking about taking part in terrorism is they need a place to belong. They need a sense of significance and purpose. They need an ideology. They need the group to weaponize them and help them pick their targets and perhaps even go along with them if they're not heading out on their own. So the group is very, very important. And there are, of course, terrorists that have radicalized and carried out terrorist acts without a group, but they're really outliers. So they're not so common. The second thing is an ideology or a narrative. And we see with ISIS and Al-Qaeda, the ideology is Islam is under attack, Muslims need to be protected, and Islamic lands need to be protected. So you must engage in defensive jihad. It's your duty as a Muslim. But other terrorist ideologies can be like an abortion clinic terrorist group would put out that innocent babies are being slaughtered in an abortion clinic. You must go and save them. It's your religious duty, perhaps as a Christian. And generally, the ideology functions to bond you to the group, to give you a sense of purpose, but most importantly, to teach you that it is okay to jump over the moral barrier that most people have about killing other people. Even militaries have to help you learn to kill other people. And even more importantly, to kill other people that are innocent, that aren't combatants. And this does take believing that you are defending others or believing that you're righteous and that you somehow can justify it to yourself. The third thing is social support. Generally, terrorist groups are able to recruit quite easily when there's a high level of social support. And I always take my example as in Palestine, in one of the demonstrations, there was a granny carrying a RPG. And imagine if you saw your granny carrying an RPG, you would think if it's good enough for her, it's good enough for me, right? And we do, as social creatures, look around at our social group and judge whether something's appropriate or not. And when there is more people endorsing, the easier it is to go into a terrorist group. And now we see that social support can be offered over the internet. So a lonely person can get on the internet and suddenly find friends in Raqqa, Syria, Deir ez-Zor, Syria, in other countries around the world, all who form an echo chamber for him or her, telling her, this is your Islamic duty, you should do it, you'll be a hero, and we need you to enact some kind of terrorist act. So social support doesn't need to be in person anymore. And as we're seeing even today when we're talking together, that you can have an intimate connection via Zoom, via Skype, via text. There's so many ways to communicate now that can bring people really close from around the world, which is a good thing, but it can also be used for dangerous reasons. Then the fourth thing, so there's the group, the ideology, social support. Then the fourth thing is whatever the individual motivations and vulnerabilities are inside the person. And those differ by if you're in a conflict zone or if you're in a non-conflict zone. So in a conflict zone, we oftentimes see people that are revenge and trauma oriented. If you've raped my sister, tortured my father, taken my house, made it impossible for me to be employed or go to school, I might start gravitating to the local terrorist group because they have answers to my grievances and they provide an outlet for my rage. In non-conflict zones, you'll see things like facing marginalization, discrimination, lack of economic opportunities, especially when a group like ISIS was offering free homes and salaries, and wanting purpose, significance, falling in love, group of friends, goes on and on and on. And you can look on our website. I have a paper called The Lethal Cocktail of Terrorism, or you can just Google it. And if you do, you'll see that there's 50 variables that over my study of terrorists that I've identified as possible vulnerabilities or motivations. So now let's get to the breaking the ISIS brand. As you know, ISIS was extremely adept on the internet, and so around since the beginning, and even before ISIS, Syrians were on the internet saying, Muslims all over the world, what are you going to do? Do you see we're having barrel bombs raining down on us? We're being gassed. Assad is raping our women. His regime is so horrible to us. Is anyone going to come and defend us? And then ISIS building on top of that, once they had established their state, saying we have a utopia, we're overthrowing Assad, and we're bringing a true Islamic state with a true caliph that you have a duty to come and join. So between those two things, oh, and then the other thing is ISIS is really credited for having great propaganda and for using the internet really well. And those two things are really true, but we also have to say that ISIS came at the exact moment when social media allowed a group like ISIS to suddenly distribute its message to billions of people all over the world. And with social media, all you have to do is sit back and find out who likes your message. Literally, if they like it, if they share it, if they retweet it, if they comment on it, then you know that you can hone in and swarm in on that individual person. So it makes recruiting a lot easier. And that's exactly what ISIS did. So during that time period, I sat down with the US State Department, and we talked about, given all these interviews that I'd done, would it be possible to construct some kind of counter narrative that would come from a non-state actor? So we stood up ICSVE, the International Center for the Study of Violent Extremism, which I direct. And I told the State Department, I don't think this could just be anybody that I've interviewed in the past, to go back and video interview them. I think it actually needs to be ISIS if we're speaking against ISIS. And I always had this idea to try to turn terrorist propaganda back on its head and use it against itself. So I went hunting, and I already was a quite successful terrorist hunter. And the first interviews were done with Ahmet Yala in the south of Turkey. And we found 32 Syrians that had come out of ISIS and were living in the south of Turkey that were willing to talk to us. So we got them on video. And it goes like this. I do the interviewing, and at this point we have 255 interviews of ISIS people. So in the beginning, I told State Department, I don't think I can get ISIS on video. I'll end up on video, a beheading video. But it didn't turn out that way. And at this point, we've interviewed 255, and it's an in-depth psychological interview. So I started, as most psychologists would, with trying to figure out who the person was before they even heard of ISIS. And how did they hear of ISIS? Was it through social media? Was it through their friendship network? Was it through a cold call recruiter? Was it somebody on the street? Was it somebody in the mosque? Was it someone in their school? Or if they're in Iraq or Syria, did ISIS just come? Sorry, I had cleaners here today. I think they stirred up some dust. But is it someone that, did ISIS take over their town? Sorry. But, and then what was their pathway? Did someone fund their travel? If they traveled, and how did they go to ISIS? Then what happened when they got to ISIS? And this is all being video recorded. So they tell me if they're a woman, they usually went into a Madafa. If they're a man, they went into a Madafa, but then they were taken to Sharia training and to weapons training. And they were offered, would you like to be a Shaheed, a suicide terrorist? And one of the guys that we were going over his interview yesterday for Trinidad and Tobago was saying that 50% of the people in his group raised their hands and signed their names to be on a Shaheed list. And they were taken away to be prepared for that. And they probably went driving vehicles to explode themselves at checkpoints and places like that. So then I asked them, what was your job? What were you assigned to? And how long did you work in that job? And the whole history. So if you end up interviewing someone that survived all the way to Baghouz, it goes about what their job was, how they felt about ISIS. Most people's peak of radicalization is during the time right around Sharia training, because the ISIS Sharia trainers were very, very good at what they did. And they were able to convince people that the ISIS ideology was correct. They didn't convince everybody. So again, the case we went over yesterday, he was from Trinidad, and he said when ISIS was saying everybody else outside of ISIS is a murtad, had given up Islam and wasn't following the correct Islam, he thought back to his home, to his mother, who was a devout Muslim, and said this can't be true. He thought of Saudi Arabia and thought, you know, it can't be 50 million people in Saudi are not Muslims, it can't be true. And he was actively rejecting it. But as people tell me about being disillusioned, I ask them, did you ever speak up? And if you didn't, why? And they tell me about what happened to people that spoke up, and themselves included, if they were ever punished, what happened to them, if they saw executions, if they saw the sabaya, how they changed jobs. And a lot of people just stopped working for ISIS. They went AWOL, and what happened to them if they were caught, if they tried to get out of the organization, if they tried to smuggle themselves out, if they talked to other people about getting out, what happened to them. Some people were multiple smuggling attempts, and in the case of returnees, finally succeeded. In the case of people that ended up in SDF prisons, were caught, and asked them all the details of that. At the very end of the interview, I asked them if they have advice to other people, if they think that ISIS lived up to the utopian promises it had made over the internet or otherwise, if they thought they were good Muslims, if they had advice to other people about joining. And of course, the advice changes over time. In the very beginning, it was, don't come, you're not helping the Syrian people. It's crazy to join this organization. Nowadays, people say more things like, ISIS is over, Baghdadi was a traitor, and these kind of things. And we finished the interview. At the very, very end, I asked them if they want to go home to their country, if they've had contact with their home country authorities, and if they would like me to share their notes with their justice ministries. In almost all cases, Russians say no, but otherwise, across the board, almost everybody says yes to that. So that has branched out to a whole other area where we've started working with countries and sharing the videos and the notes with country authorities, hopefully to move repatriation along. And I always tell them, you know, this will probably be used on behalf of prosecuting you. And they said, that's fine. I'd rather be prosecuted than be home. And that's exactly what we do. So in Germany, we sat down with the Germans, went over 21 cases, met with the prosecutor, the police, and the federal prosecutor, and they told me it was of great assistance to them in understanding who they were going to face at the airport when they were repatriated, if they're ever repatriated. But anyway, after this interview, I have it on video. We take it home, we get it retranslated to make sure it's correct, and we start chopping it, and we chop it into short videos, and we make them between 5 and 1 minutes long. And sometimes we make a 5-minute and a 1-minute version, because we found that people don't pay that close of attention on social media. They like shorter, as we all know, that, you know, attention spans are short on social media. And then we're partnered with Facebook, and we make these videos in 27 different languages. So the first version is always with English subtitles, and then we subtitle them in other languages. So if any of you are foreign language fluent and you'd like to volunteer, let us know, because all our translations are done by volunteers. But with Facebook, then we start putting these videos out in different countries. So we're almost always running campaigns in Iraq. We've had one video that had over 1 million views. We campaign in Europe. Every month we're running a new campaign in European countries and in about 10 different languages that are appropriate to the countries. We campaign in the Balkans a lot. We campaign in North Africa, Jordan, Indonesia, and use different videos for different contexts. And at this point, we've cut 201 short video clips, and we call these Breaking the ISIS Brand counter-narrative videos. And I'm going to show you one at the end of my talk here so that you can get an idea. I'm going to show you a 1-minute one since time is short. And what we find is that people on the internet engage with them. They share them, they comment on them, and the 1-minute ones they watch through to completion, which is really cool. And what our hope is, and what we found when we focus tested them also around the world, we focus tested them in Kosovo, Kyrgyzstan, Europe, in the US with the Al-Shabaab ones with Somali populations, and also in the US with the just general university population. And what we find is that they catch attention because they're, oh, and I should say, with these videos, it's a talking head. It's a person speaking, and sometimes they say blur my face and change my name. So we have to have something to illustrate what they're talking about. And what we found was that ISIS's media was so rich in that regard. So when they're talking about home, we pick things off the internet. So let's say a guy is talking about Brussels, we'll, pick different video that goes with what he's speaking about. But once he's in ISIS, we use pretty much ISIS video to illustrate what he's speaking about, which then allows us to have the thumbnail from the ISIS material, and we name them with ambiguous names, like The Glorious Cuds of the Caliphate, for a kid that's talking about getting recruited to be a suicide bomber in the Caliphate. And the reason that we do that is you don't want to name a counter-narrative video best counter-narrative video ever. You want to name it a name that an ISIS person, someone that's sympathizing with ISIS, would look at. And our whole rationale in what we're doing is that we think an insider is the most believable person, the most credible person to speak against ISIS. We like that they speak in simple language, and we structure our videos to speak first and foremost what they liked about ISIS, what attracted them to ISIS, and what their grievances were. And then they move to what their actual experiences were in ISIS, and then their advice to others. In the 1-minute video, you're going to see it's pretty compact. And I'm not a big fan of the 1-minute videos. I like the 5-minute ones better. But in all our campaigning on Facebook and Instagram, we direct them to what we call the realjihad.org website, where they can watch many more of the videos in their language. And so if it's in English, they can have a fest of watching hundreds of them. But anyway, I've just scratched the surface of what we do, and I see that I'm getting close to my time. So I'm going to attempt to play this video for you. Let's see, I think this should...
And you should have control now.
Yeah, let's see. Okay, I hope that you see the video.
Mm-hmm. I do.
Okay, I hope you'll hear it too. Let's see. Let me put my volume. Yep, I got my volume.
When I came, I heard you're gonna go straightly to the massacre. So they take your passport, your telephone, laptops. I heard a lot of stories. A lot of people will get killed. So to be honest, I was getting afraid. The ones who come back from Iraq to Syria, they told me from where they're coming that a lot of people died, killed. So the next morning I stepped up and I took the car back to Iraq. Then started my problems because they called it deserting. After a week, the police took me to prison. They put me 21 days in prison. They're liars and they're corrupt. You will not believe that it's true. You will think it's a piece of the movie Saw or a horror movie. They leave us behind to die under the bombing. When we want to get out, they wanted to kill us. I destroyed the beautiful years of my life.
Okay, so that's a really short one. Oops. I want to show you our YouTube channel so you can see it. Just a minute. Oh, I didn't realize that I have so many open. We'll let that go then. Okay, so if we can stop the screen share. All right. And happy to answer questions. But if you look at our YouTube channel, it's ICSVE on YouTube. And you can see all the videos that we made. And what we do is we allow people that are fighting ISIS to use them. So we've given lots of police trainings and told them, if you want to use these in your public talks, same thing with imams. One of my favorite stories is about a guy in the UK that was counseling a 13-year-old, and he said, this kid came to me 3-4 times, and the last time he came, I thought, God, he's going to go to Raqqa. This is in the height of ISIS. And he said, I suddenly remembered that you had these videos. So I opened the one about the 13-year-old that was going to be a suicide bomber, and I showed it to him. And this kid was a little thug, so he said, is that for real? And my friend Omar said, yes, this is for real, and that's what's going to happen to you. And the kid changed his mind. So that's probably one of the stories I'm the most proud of. And we also used, I inadvertently, because I was scared actually, showed 2 of the videos to an ISIS emir in Sulaymaniyah, and also got a really strong response from him of shame and admitting that ISIS was wrong, where before he had been really caught in a sense of bravado. But that's probably where I should stop and open it for question and answer. And I'm happy to talk. I can talk on this for hours, so.
You obviously, Anne, have a lot of passion for this, and that was really very, very interesting. And I'm sure that people will seek out the videos and have a look at them on their own time. And we're very proud of our multilingual, multicultural team, so you may even get some volunteers to help with your translations. I have some questions here. The first one is, it appears that Western media very much bought into the ISIS propaganda, sensationalizing the group and exponentially amplifying their message and recruitment. Do you agree with this statement? And how much do you think the Western media is to blame for increasing recruitment to ISIS? And what do you think of projects that, like Don't Name Them, which aims to reduce the possibility of media sensationalization of these mass shootings of perpetrators?
Well, we've seen that in Israel years ago, that they didn't allow the news to sensationalize suicide bombers when it was the height in the Second Intifada, and that was effective. And we've seen that with school shooters too, that some networks have stopped. I don't want to accuse them of glorifying, but newsifying the person that carried it out, because then it just lends to copycat crimes. But I would certainly agree that the media has been deeply involved in inadvertently recruiting for ISIS. And that's an interesting thing, because I ask in detail for foreign travelers, how did you hear about ISIS? How did you get the idea to go to ISIS? And some say, I was watching videos of Syrians and I felt sorry. Some say I was watching al-Nusra and I was watching ISIS. But others say, I heard it on the media. I saw how successful this group was, and I saw all kinds of news about ISIS. I watched Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's speech on the news. So, we have to credit the news with giving them the opportunity to go to ISIS, right? And the other thing is, the counter to that is, I also asked people, didn't you realize what ISIS was? Because it was all over the news, depending on when they went in. But if they went in after James Foley was beheaded and the spate of beheadings happened, I asked, were you aware of these things? And, how did you discount that? And many Muslims in Europe have told me, well, I don't believe the news. The news is Islamophobic. So anything they said against the Islamic State, I thought it was just a Western slant. I didn't think it was the truth.
It seems to me that just blaming this on, or not blaming, but, you know, is this just the Western media, or is this something where, you know, all media can get caught up into this? You know, we used to have a saying in Mexico when I was trying to get them to not put all of the gory details on front page of the newspaper, that, you know, blood sells.
Yeah, if it bleeds, it leads. It does, and that's just a sad fact that people are fascinated with these things. That's the other thing with female terrorism, that if you send females like the Chechens did into the Dubrovka theater, when half those people that took over the theater were women in black burqas, it just absolutely fascinated everyone, and the world was riveted with it. Female suicide bombers almost always get more news coverage than males do. And so I wouldn't blame the media, but I would say that there certainly is a contribution there, and there's certainly room for improvement on how to cover these things without sensationalizing them, without inadvertently promoting them. One thing that might be interesting to your group is that in our sample, we've culled the data for, I think it's 252 of them now. And we found that 50% had internet recruitment, influence, and facilitation. And if we looked at the sample and looked at only internet recruitment, 22% of the sample was recruited only over the internet. And when we looked at foreigners, we found that 79% of the men and 64% of the women had internet influence, and around 30% had only internet recruitment. So that tells you something, that wow, we need to be on the internet. And I should say, with our videos, we're able to hyper-target. So we're able to go to the communities on Facebook that are discussing ISIS and hyper-target our videos to them. And we're also able to just go to a general audience. And it makes a difference, of course.
And we've got questions pouring in here. So, but the one follow-up to what you just said, and we don't need to, you know, we can talk about this a little later, but when you say internet, you're meaning social media, and is there any platform that seems to be the most used or the most popular? Is it Facebook, or is it some of the others?
Oh, it's definitely Telegram. And we're just putting out a paper next week. And I'm going to put my my email here. If any of you want to be on our email list, you can just pop me an email and we'll add you. But we put out a paper almost every 2 weeks because we're crunching this data and looking at different aspects of it. So we've looked at what is spontaneous de-radicalization? How are the people moving out of this group without even a program in place? Gender aspects, all of those kind of things. But we've just put out a paper where we have one of our research fellows that's monitoring the internet after the French attacks and after the Austrian attack, and Telegram just exploded. And Telegram has been a choice of ISIS for a long time. They're also talking about using Hoop, but Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, the rest of them have takedown policies, but that doesn't mean that Facebook's not on those platforms. They definitely are. They just don't last long. So they've learned ways to always migrate you to a new page and move you ahead. But the woman that monitors that for us, Mona Thacker, she keeps finding horrific things, even on Facebook.
Okay. Next question, Anne. You've interviewed different types of groups, varying from the anti-abortionists, left-wing, right-wing, and jihadist groups. Which one do you see over-focused on their ideologies? And I guess the second part of the question is, are there any interesting and unforgettable interviews that you've had, and what made them so interesting?
I haven't interviewed any left-wingers yet, but I would say the ISIS ones, they're all unforgettable in their own ways. And ideology is a piece of the puzzle. It's not the whole puzzle, but I am a proponent of trying to de-radicalize people. I don't believe that a person is fully rehabilitated unless he has really grappled with the ideology and come to grips with his own personal responsibility. A lot of these guys are de-radicalizing and giving up the ideology and giving up ISIS, but they're not to a point where they take personal responsibility. Instead, they blame the group and say, I was a victim of the group. And that's true. They were a victim of the group, but they were also a cog in a killing machine, in a group that did horrific things. And they have to take responsibility for that, in my view, to really get through to what I would say is a truly rehabilitated person. So ideology isn't always necessary for a person to, they don't have to have a strong ideological commitment, but we should look at how important ideology was to ISIS. Every single man that joined after the Islamic State was formed, unless he was a Sharia teacher when he came in, he was sent to a 2-week Sharia training. So that's how important ideology was to ISIS. They wanted people to understand and commit to it and get excited about it. And their ideology, of course, was we're the only correct version of Islam and everyone else can be killed. So I hope that answers the question. And as far as the stories that really struck me, just watch the videos. They'll blow your mind. I mean, because they blew my mind. And they're just pitiful. They're pitiful. Oh, I'd say the thing that strikes me every time I go into Syria is the waste of humanity. To think that 40,000 foreigners came into Syria believing in some kind of a dream and believing that they were going to be a hero, and just destroyed their own lives and destroyed other people's lives. And when I meet this massive humanity in the prisons and in the camps and talk to them, it's heartbreaking. I mean, even though they're guilty and have done horrible things and were part of the most heinous group ever, it's still heartbreaking because they're human beings, and to think that they were tricked that way and that they believed these lies.
Thank you, Anne. The next question, have there been similar studies involving and interviewing right-wing groups, whether they be US-based or international?
We're just starting that. We've just added Jesse Morton to our staff, and we're very happy about that. He runs Parallel Networks and Light Upon Life. Mm-hmm. And Jesse has off-ramped 85 people from far-right groups. And so I've just started interviewing some of the people that he's taken out of these, or helped to take out of these groups. I don't think it was only Jesse Morton in some cases, but so again, the same interview style of who were you before you ran into the far right, what attracted you to it, how did you get in, what happened once you were in, when you started seeing the cracks and got disillusioned, how did that happen, how did you leave, what were your fears about leaving, and how's your life now? And it's been fascinating. We're coding them along the same lines because of the same variables. And when we get a large enough sample, we'll be able to make comparisons.
And we will invite you back to talk to us about it.
Okay, well, it's an American sample, and it would be nice to make it bigger and go for an international sample, but you know, you only have so many hours in a day, right?
That's right. The next question, this is Dr. Speckhard said that, and I'm paraphrasing here, that she is good at finding terrorists. How do you reach out to them, former or current terrorists, for interviews? And how do you persuade them to do an interview?
Well, it's different in every context. So sometimes it's persuading the prison authorities that they would let you into the prison and that they would trust you. So because I helped design the detainee rehabilitation program in Iraq for DOD, when I got up to about 400 terrorist interviews, DOD asked me, could you help us make a de-radicalization program in Iraq? So I helped with what was to be used in Buka with our 23,000 detainees, 800 juveniles. And that gives me some credibility. And the fact that I've interviewed all these terrorists gives me credibility. So a lot of times the prison authorities want to meet me and they want to work with me. And I'm pretty much, oh, I'm so sorry. I should have brought a glass of water.
I wished I was there and could get you one, but that's not going to happen.
But anyway, so sometimes it's persuading prison authorities. In the case of the Syrians that had crossed the border, Ahmet Yala talked first to a smuggler, and Ahmet was a police chief in Urfa, a retired, and the smuggler agreed to share some, to talk to some people that he had smuggled out of ISIS to talk with us, and all the people were scared, so scared to talk to us. And scared probably because Ahmet was former police, because the referral came through the smuggler that they didn't really trust. And so we quickly moved to asking one of the interviewees if he would work with us because he spoke Turkish, and if he would start referring people. So ISIS guys know each other, right? And so he started referring people. And so he was our first point of contact, talking to people. You know, it depends where you go. When I went in Palestine, I just announced exactly what I wanted, that I wanted to talk to people that were interested in suicide terrorism and were even thinking about becoming one, or were in line to become one. And everybody laughed and said, "You're crazy, nobody will talk to you." And then they talked. And as far as getting them to talk, I think you have to treat them like human beings. You have to have respect for them. I come across with a compassionate view, and I make sure that they understand that I'm not an interrogator. We go through a whole human subjects protocol at the beginning of the interview, but part of it is telling them I'm neither a journalist or a interrogator, and I would like them to protect themselves by not admitting to any crimes that they haven't already admitted to the authorities that are holding them. And if they start talking about terrible crimes, like for instance, a UK guy had assassinated 17 ISIS members, and he wanted to talk about it. And he was just a kid. And he started telling me about the first two. And it was really hard to shut him down because I wanted to hear about it. It was fascinating because they treated it totally differently than when they killed civilians. And I told him, "You have to stop. You're on film. You can't tell me this." And he said, no, I've already been interviewed by the UK police. They told me my citizenship is stripped and they're cool with it. And I had to tell him there's no police force in the world that is cool with assassinations. And, you know, they were probably telling you that so that you would feel comfortable and talk, but I'm not going to tell you that. And made him stop.
And the questions are coming in fast and furiously now. So the next one is one that actually is really one that I would ask you as well. And it's by our colleague, Dr. Cengiz, who's Turkish, but is also one of our terrorism experts on the project. After the France attacks...
I'm going to let my cat out the door. Just 1 second. She's
sure.
But I can do it.
Okay, after the French attacks, President Macron has debated the terrorist issue in the context of Islam, and said, you know, it is Islam that is in crisis. Then corrupt political Islamist governments reacted and exploited the issue. Would you find it a decent strategy debating homegrown extremism, terrorism issue in the Western world in the context of Islam? I should say that the Canadian Prime Minister got himself in all sorts of trouble because he attempted to say in a nuanced way that freedom of expression is a right, but it comes with boundaries, and you know, you would no more shout fire in a cinema. And he was trying to kind of come with a more balanced view of, you know, how to treat people with respect, so that you don't inflame some of these issues. So you've got the kind of Macron Trudeau difference, which is playing out now in actual international relations. But there you go.
Well, there's many questions in that question, and one thing is about free speech. And I lived in Belgium for 7 years, and as far as I remember, that they had some limits on free speech, that you couldn't insult religion and things like that. France obviously does not, but I think that we can say that the majority of the Muslim community in France does experience the Charlie Hebdo caricature as hate speech. That of course never justifies responding with terrorism, but their experience of it is as hate speech. And you know, we have limits on freedom of speech. We don't allow Holocaust denials, and the whole purpose of freedom of speech, as I understand it constitutionally, is to allow us to be able to speak about our government without fearing persecution, which is very different than being allowed to seriously insult another person's religion. But that's a debate that's going to go on, and it's not my area of expertise. So that's just what I would say about it. As far as Macron, first of all, the French need to face their own issues in their own country before they turn to talking about other governments exploiting radical Islam, because having lived in Belgium and traveled in France quite a bit, and I did a lot of research with North Africans in Belgium that were first and second generation. Many of them would tell you that they're highly discriminated against, and in France as well, that they can't always get housing where they want to get it based on their ethnicity and immigrant Muslim descent status. They can't get housing, they can't get jobs. We even had our students apply for jobs as a Muslim identity, North African, and as a white European descent. And there were only slight differences on the resumes, and we got differences of the job's been filled for the Muslim applicant, and please come for an interview, to the white applicant. And they also get blocked from going to places like nightclubs, so they may be trying to integrate and get told, go home Moroccan. So those are really serious issues that Macron should be addressing himself. As far as other countries exploiting radical and political Islam, absolutely, for sure they do. And Erdogan is one of those. He loves to speak to Europe's Muslims and be seen as the defender of Islam. And I think he himself, and he has allowed in his own country a lot of insightful language that matches some things that are close to what ISIS says. And when we look at the Turkish-backed rebels in Syria, we see actions, and we see former members of ISIS among them. So, you know, these are things, all of these things need to be addressed. And again, I would go back to Telegram. What we found is Macron's statements were very strongly discussed on ISIS channels and Telegram, and with hashtags of, we must attack the French.
And I'm gonna, as the last question, I'm gonna combine two here, and for any of those of you who have not had your questions answered, we'll get back to you in written form. So how do I come, okay, so the first part of this is, given the gender issue, the culture of gender, did your gender in any way affect any of the interviewing process? And the second part of this, who's doing rehabilitation well? I mean, we all know that's complicated. I mean, I've done work on gangs, and full rehabilitation is not easy. So, what are the odds of rehabilitation, and which countries seem to be doing this well? I mean, are there any models out there? So gender and rehabilitation, and then we'll let everybody go.
Okay, great. As far as gender, gender is really important in these groups, and they had strong gender stereotypes. I found throughout my years of interviewing with jihadists that a lot of them come from strict cultural backgrounds where they don't talk intimately with women that they're not married to or that are outside of their immediate family. So most of them welcomed talking to me and found it interesting to talk to a woman. When I worked in Buka, I wore Salafi clothes. And what I found, if I was going to judge what the transference was, I felt that the people came into an interrogation room, not sure if they were going to be interrogated. They were, of course, explained immediately that it wasn't an interrogation. But when they saw me in Salafi clothes, that they saw their mother. And many of them interacted with me in that way. I tend to be maternal, and it works. On the other side of that, you better be traveling with a male companion. Otherwise, safety is an issue. And there's judgments, of course. I've been asked to cover my legs at different, I've been asked to wear a headscarf. Abu Qatada wouldn't talk to me unless I wore a headscarf. So rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is still an area where we're learning. I went to a USIP conference where a young woman gave a report. It was a very good academic report, but she said that there's no evidence base for de-radicalization at this point. And it made me laugh because good therapy, good cognitive behavioral therapy has a strong evidence base. And de-radicalization programs are basically good cognitive behavioral psychology, coupled with a knowledge of the culture of jihadists and coupled with an understanding of the Islamic issues in the ideology that they may or may not have taken on. So my view and what I designed in Buka was that we would have both psychological counseling that would be trauma informed, and because a lot of these people have taken traumas on, and that we would also have Islamic scholars that were knowledgeable and able to challenge the ideology that they had taken on. But you need both sides. You need to come to it from both sides. And as far as who's doing a good job, I would say the Germans are doing a good job. Austrians are doing a good job, although we just had this attack that went through. The guy was briefly in a program with GRAD, one of our partners at ICSVE EU. And DRAD was kind of angry for getting blamed for that because they didn't do a full program with him. But, you know, rehabilitation has many actors and many constraints of, you know, is the person able to walk away from the program when they're no longer incarcerated? Are they mandated into it? Are they lying? Are they, you know, how good are the people giving the program? Our center is actively involved in the Maldives right now, in North Macedonia and Trinidad and Tobago, on helping to put, on consulting on putting good prevention programs together and good rehabilitation programs together. And I would say that has to be seen holistically. And as you've seen, you can use examples from people that go through programs, and the people that I've interviewed are not in programs, but they've still agreed to appear in counter-narrative videos. So you can use what you're doing, if you're doing good rehabilitation, to then turn it around for prevention. And prevention's the name of the game. Mm-hmm. You know, we want to be ahead of this, not behind it.
Absolutely. And it's about 55 minutes, so we run a little over time. I'd just like to thank everybody who is listening in for their participation and questions. I'd also, and obviously we're indebted to you for what was a very interesting and lively presentation, and hope that you will come back soon and tell us the results, or inform us of the results of your interviews with the right-wing groups, especially in the United States. So,
and I would just say, if you're interested in more in-depth on the details of our sample, we have published so many papers on cutting the data in different ways. There's a paper called ISIS in Their Own Words. Most of them are on our website. So if you go to the ICSVE website, you can find that, or you can go to my academia page. I usually put them up there. And happy reading if you like reading.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Have a good weekend. It's Friday, and we'll be back in touch soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.